So if you ever get the chance, move heaven and earth to spend a couple of days with this woman. Today, unfortunately, we've only got an hour to spend with her, so I'm not going to say any more. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Jann Derrick here today. Hi, Jan.
Hi, Niawa. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Hi. You too.
Hi, I'm trying to get a hold of Sheila Langett.
Might help if everybody can please put themselves on mute to accept our speaker.
Do we have to know who this is calling?
I think I can.
Yeah, we will. We'll get everybody to mute themselves, and then I guess too, Jan, maybe hold any questions to the end. Is that
no? I'm going to break it up because
okay.
I find that I have to bring people along with the information.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie.
Okay.
Thanks. And so in my language, I say sego. Sego's going to go. Niawa sukwai so niawa. What gunawalado? And so I've said that I come in peace. And are you at peace? And that I give thanks for all that is. It's so amazing. This beautiful universe is so amazing. So I'm still admitting people here.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. And so if I talk with you and share with you about attachment and attachment perspectives, attachment actions in Indigenous cultures, I want to start out by telling you that I'm talking and sharing and describing this information from a meta view. It's quite large, and I will give examples from the cultures I'm familiar with. So I'm Haudensaunee heritage, which is in English often referred to as Iroquois, Mohawk, and my grandfather was fostered. And so as soon as he was old enough, he left Haudensaunee heritage and headed west. And so we are Western Mohawks, we call ourselves, here in British Columbia. So I'm in Salmon Arm, if you're familiar at all with the Shuswap area of the interior of BC. And my family intermarried with the Secwepemc Nation. So I'm also familiar with the Secwepemc cultures and traditions. And I have 6 grandchildren, and we've picked up a 3 or 4 along the way, and we celebrate ceremonies and work in the Secwepemc way. But what I'm noticing is how similar, of course, they are to the Haudenosaunee. So I'm encouraging you to listen to the big picture, the meta picture about attachment in our cultures. And then if you are working with Indigenous people, be really respectful and clear to ask what theirs are, because it will fit with the meta picture, but it will be very specific to the culture they're from. And then also be prepared that many of us don't know. We're still learning, we're still picking it up because of the interruption in our families, which again is about attachment. So as I speak, I'm going to stop occasionally and check in and see if you have questions, which if you put them on the chat, I can read them, but I find it distracting to be reading and talking and sharing all at the same time. So I'm a one person at a time thing. And I'll stop and we can have questions and discussion. And I want to be sure that you're understanding what I'm saying, because it's not always easy to translate Indigenous concepts into English. And even though I don't speak my own language very well, I'm still learning. I'm still translating. So I want to be sure that you're understanding what I'm saying. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about the Indigenous worldview in it for a few minutes because it directs and it hosts all our information about attachment. So for some of you, this is just a review, I'm sure, but just to be sure that you're clear that the Indigenous worldview is spiritually based. It's all about spirits coming from another place to the earth to have an earth experience. And that experience is, from an Indigenous perspective, it's about learning how to love better. It's learning how to grow ourselves spiritually. So all the attachment pieces that I'll be describing are spiritually based. And doesn't mean to say they can't be applied physically and mentally, emotionally, but they come from a spiritual place. So that's a very important point I want to make. And then we work, and this is something probably most of you know, we work understanding there are 4 aspects to our lives. There's the spiritual base, there's the emotional area, then we come into earth and we carry, this is teaching, so we carry our emotional aspect with us from lifetime to lifetime. Not all cultures say that, but mine does. So that the spirits who come in with the emotional base, and then on earth we enter into the physical body, and then the last aspect, mental, is the last to grow. We know science is saying now that our brains are not fully developed till about 24, 25. So attachment trust begins at the spiritual level, and it goes through all 4 aspects, and it travels through the lifetime of the person, beginning prior to entering earth. Okay? So in my language, the word for family is Gawajale. And it translates into a sentence which says, we are wrapped together biologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. We are wrapped together. And so in terms of the healing that we're now doing in our families, we are rewrapping our families. We are wrapping them together with the history and knowledge and increasing wisdom around the depth of the trauma and loss that we've been through. So we are having to learn how to attach again in a much stronger way, and not always from the spiritual base to begin with, but the attachment pieces that I share and that I teach are based in the spiritual aspect. So well, I think I'll stop there. Are there any questions about that? Because that's the foundation of what I'll be saying, and just wanting to be sure that's clear for people. Okay. Looks like everybody's on board. That's super. Okay. So traditionally, knowing that this only happens here and there because of our trauma, but traditionally, there was a commitment made by the couple to have a child before they impregnated, so that they would be praying and asking for guidance and offering commitment to spirit and to their ancestors to bring forth another being. It's a big undertaking to host a spirit coming over and coming to earth. So being a parent is an enormous commitment, and it's a spiritual base. And again, in my language, we say gunalukwa, which is, it translates to I love you, but really the language for it is, I will carry you in my heart until we pass over. I will carry you in my heart until we pass over. So it's like a lifetime commitment to love somebody. And we say that to our children, gunalukwa. And making the commitment, we know that we, as adults, as young adults particularly, we know that we are needing to be self-disciplined and self-aware, which are key pieces of the culture that by the time a parent are ready to have children, they've been pretty well schooled and trained in self-discipline and self-awareness. Again, this is traditional. We know that that's really chaotic right now, but that's where most of our cultures are heading back to, bringing that back in our teachings, and in the healing that we're doing, that's very much an emphasis. Self-discipline, self-awareness. And the emphasis is on love and kindness. I have been so overwhelmed when I go home and I sit with the language teacher and I just sit and cry. It's so loving. It's not that I'm sad. It's like I'm overwhelmed with the loving kindness of my culture and the depth of knowledge. I was thinking, because I was learning how to make baskets. We were doing baskets in the Mohawk way, and I was struggling, and I was thinking, how many of my grandmothers did this day in and day out and wove baskets so tight it would hold water? Like, that's self-discipline. And yeah, just amazed by my culture and how loving and kind it is. And as I've worked with survivors here in the Shatnik territory, even the most traumatized people, even the most traumatized elders will take a child and pat them on the head and love them up. Even if they're all grizzly and growly for the rest of the day, they'll still do that with the child. So children are the center of our cultures. We're child-based, spiritually focused cultures. So all the roles that we have as adults are based on those centerpieces. So the role of the parent, the role of the grandparent, the role of the aunts and uncles are all around the spiritual center and the child focus. And it's all designed to bring spirit to earth in a loving way, and that the children are raised to be self-disciplined again and self-aware. So I think of some of the stories I've heard about preparation for conception. And often here in the West, not so much on the prairies and in the East, but here there's a lot of use of the water. And so there'd be prayers in the morning down at the river or down at the lake or down at the ocean. And that's where the commitments are made. So when the conception occurs, then there's a preparation to get through the pregnancy, and there's preparation to move into the role of parent. And this is all about making certain that the spirit that's coming to earth is firmly attached. I would say the second and third most basic foundations of Indigenous cultures are about being attached to being here on earth, because it's so important to have moved from one world to another, which is the earthly world, and want to stay and want to complete the family and want to go through the process of being here and die a good death. And so anything that could possibly happen to make that journey firm and clear is imposed. And so the young parents, or maybe they're older too, because I actually have friends who have babies when they're in their 50s. So it's like, so the parents prepare for physical endurance and mental focus. And in one of the nations that I've worked with, they lived in the canyon, in the Fraser Canyon, which you may have heard of or been driven through on Highway 1. The fathers, the future fathers, in the morning would run up the canyon to the top of the hill, and the mothers would go down the canyon to the river and bathe in the cold water. And that was to learn endurance and focus. And they did that throughout the pregnancy. And then they were taught by the elders at that point. They were taught about ways to go ahead with the parenting duties, how to manage and work with children. And of course, there'd be children all around anyway. So they were already getting a lot of it firsthand experientially. There's also a lot of tradition around keeping the developing fetus very safe. There's a practice of belly wrapping for the young mother. So it involves sometimes a special cloth, but a cloth, which is wrapped around her belly. And whenever she leaves her home, she wears that to protect the baby. And then if she will be in a situation environmentally where there may be anger or fear or hurt of some kind, then somebody, usually an auntie, goes with her and talks to the baby. So as the mom's sitting, I've had this happen, the mom's sitting in this meeting and we're talking about trauma, and the auntie's talking like this down to the baby on her belly, saying, "It's all right, I love you, I care for you, we're keeping you safe." And so with that, of course, is the understanding that that spirit is already alive and well. And so that they hear and know what's going on. And of course, science has proved that to be true now as well. So that as soon as the conception happened, we began making certain that baby was well attached and wanting to be here, and that we were keeping that baby safe. So checking in again, any questions, any comments? Anybody know something that you want to add? Thanks, guys. Just checking chat. Thank you for your comments. So I'll go sideways for a few minutes too, because it's in our families, it's very communal. We're not focused on the individual. We're focused on relationship. And so the aunties and the great mothers, the grandmothers, are also mothers. And each culture managed this in its own way, but the cultures that I'm most familiar with was that if mom needed to go away, the other mothers would be there. And that because we are all one, wrapped together, and we're guna lukwa, I'm going to be with you until I die, and we're wrapped together as a family. If you touch a child, you touch the whole family. If you care for the child, you care for the whole family. So as a personal example, one of my grandchildren was fathered by a dad who was in the 60s scoop. He was forcibly removed at birth, and he had a rough childhood. And he's had a rough time parenting my grandchildren. And so when my grandson really acted out some of that pain, it wasn't him, it was our whole family. We all had to go in to healing. Whatever it was, we still carried that had passed it on to him. So that, just to say that in working with attachment, it's all about all of us, and it's about our relationships together that are so essential in raising a healthy, well-attached child. So going maybe now to the birthing, that there would be midwives, some of them sometimes older, but women trained to bring the baby into the world. We used a lot of natural herbs to help that happen. And we also, I was just thinking of Saskatoon berries, particular kind here in BC. They were often used as a drink to give to the mother as soon as she gave birth, to help her uterus contract, and also to make sure that if she didn't want any more babies, she could take lots of it. And there were other herbs put in as well, so that there was knowledge of how to birth a baby. And I say this because I've read so many colonial pieces that have assumed that we didn't know how to have babies. I don't know where that came from, but I just really find it important to say we knew what we were doing for centuries, and we had developed a lot of key skills in birthing babies and taking care of moms. And so the midwives that were present would have prepared the mom for the birth. And again, it's about making sure the baby's attached well. So there would be a song that would be chosen, and it was the baby song. And so as the baby was being born and then welcomed into the world, the song was sung, and that's the baby's song for the rest of their life. And when they pass, that song is sung again. So the attachment is noted in so many ways. And so always you know your song. And then again, there would be the naming that was given to you as well. So sometimes it depends on the cultures. So sometimes the family was around the birth. Other times they were introduced to the baby later. It just depends. But always they were introduced to the family that they belonged to. And they were welcomed, and welcome songs as well as their own song were sung. And it depends here when it comes to naming. There's a variety of ways it happened. So one of the concerns, and again, this is a spiritual teaching, that the spirit that's just arrived in baby form has the choice to stay or not. They have arrived on earth, but they may find it's not quite what they wanted. They're not quite up to it, or something tells them that this is not a good thing. And so they have about 6 months to decide. And then they'll just leave if they don't want to stay. So now in mainstream, we call it SID, sudden infant death. But it's documented and noted in many of our cultures that, no, that's just the baby saying, no, this isn't for me right now, and leaving. And so you will find many cultures that do not give the baby a birth name until they've passed the 6-month mark or the 3-month mark. They give the baby time to decide whether it's going to stay or not. And then when the baby is named, again, this depends on the culture. Very often, it's a name given that's important to the parents to help that child go forward and know the child belongs to the family. Sometimes a ceremonial name is given right away. because there's the expectation that the baby will become a leader in the community at some point. And so very often one of the elders who's getting close to returning home is their name is given to the baby entering, so that there's a circle of naming, a circle of connection. And then often the names change throughout the person's lifetime as well, based on their focus and their role in the community, and as they go through the stages of life. So, for example, one of the elders in my family, who's West Coast, he carried a ceremonial name, and he also carried a name that was very functional. He was the keeper of the beach. He was the chief of the beach, which was to protect the beach and anybody that arrived. However, one of his elders died, and I think this is how it went. We all had to stop calling him by his name for a whole year. We had to take up his English name, and he had to prepare to carry his uncle's traditional name, the uncle who had just passed. And so for a long time, we could only call him Joseph. And then when the year was up, he took his ritual but role leadership name that had been given to him by his uncle. And so that says so many things. We're attached to being on the earth. Yes, we're attached to our family. Yes, but we're also attached to our ancestors. And there are names that are passed on generation after generation. And so that attaches you to the lineage in such a deep way, because you know, well, spiritually, you know that all of those ancestors are walking with you. You've got that name, so they're all attached to you because of your traditional name. So I hope you're beginning to see that we're so attached, you begin to wonder if you can wiggle around and be yourself, and you can't. But attachment is so key. And so when young people, if you're working with young people who don't know much about this, just let them know that there are traditional names. If they can find those traditional names in their culture, then they'll start walking with their ancestors. And sometimes that changes people's lives, just knowing that you're walking, carrying your ancestor's name. Yeah. And then when it comes to parenting, how are we doing for time? When it comes to parenting, that babies were cradled from birth and carried on the backs of the mother or the father or an auntie or an uncle. And that was a time when they were adjusting to being here on earth. So that it was understood that, you know, it can be a hard transition to go from being in the spirit world to being here. And so this is a time for them to be held tightly like they were in the womb and wrapped and safe, and always with their families. They would always be hearing the language, they would always be picking up on the emotional aspects of the family, taking in what they hear, making sense of it as best that their brains could make sense of it. And so that generally happened until about a year. And they came out of their cradles usually for a few hours. And as they got older, of course, they'd be out longer. But one of our cultures, the Cree culture, really emphasized that they can't touch the earth with their feet until they're ready, until they're clearly attached to being with their family and they know who they belong to. And so there's a walking out ceremony, which happens when the child's about a year, and they're taken out of the cradle and their feet touch the earth for the first time. And I quite love that ceremony. And so they're welcome to their walk on earth, knowing who surrounds them and who protects them and who cares for them. Not all cultures do it quite that way, but it basically, the concept is that we're keeping you safe like you were in the womb. You're adjusting to being here on earth. You're with us all the time. And then when you're ready, your feet can touch the earth. And so there's a lot of soothing and healing. It was, and I think of the Inuit culture. I recently was hearing some information about the Inuit culture where the mother was never to be angry in front of the child. Never. That it's frightening. And that we have to discipline our emotions to that degree, that we must maintain ourselves and speak with love and kindness, because that's going to enhance the attachment. That's going to enhance the familiarity and the safety the child, the person feels. So with that, there is a ceremony. In fact, it's become a ceremony, but I think it's also just one of the wonderful ways of parenting is that when a child needs, and this child, I've done it even with my adult children, that when a child needs soothing and just comfort at a deep level, that the mom or the aunt or the grandmother, and I've never seen it done with men, but I bet it happens with men too, that we sit down and the child lies down and puts their head in our lap. And we just stroke the head, stroke the back, and tell them how much we love them. Just use kind words. I've used that as an attachment ceremony with parents where there's been fostering and or trauma at a really big level. And when the mom feels comfortable, because the child's head is going on the womb, basically. And so many of our women have been sexually harmed. That's not always a comfortable place. But you can wrap the belly, you can put a pillow there, and the child's head goes there. And you remind the child that that's their home. That's where they came from. That's how they entered the world. They came through this womb to arrive here. And I found that really helpful for foster children because they don't know home. There isn't a deep connection to home. But when they know that that's how they came and the womb is where they came from, it seems to soothe and bring a groundedness to many of the people. I was introduced to that ceremony because elders found that I was too ungrounded. So I did it on the lap of one of my teachers, and it made such a difference. So I then found all my teenage, early 20 children and offered them the same ceremony. It was like magic. My older son was being a ski bum in Banff in his early 20s, and I located him in this home with his bed was on the floor, and I just was like, I'm going to try this and see what he says. And he didn't want to get up. I did it with him, and at the end of the ceremony, he said, Mom, don't get up. Just don't get up. Just stay right here. And I'm going to cry with that. And it just, it changed so much of our relationship. So you're reattaching when you do that, if you use it now, and you are emphasizing the attachment. I will do that with my daughter sometimes too, if she's having she teaches at the college, and if she has a rough time, we'll just sit and she cuddles and her head goes down. And it's as women, it's our power place. And if the child touches that power place, they get the power. So that's a huge attachment piece. there's also, to ensure that the child is always attached and knows the family. And I think my hunch is that this tradition came out of necessity as our families were being attacked. But there's, in many of our cultures here in the West, if a couple has their eldest child, their first child, and doesn't know how to care for that child very well, then the parents will step in and take that child and raise that child. And they'll raise the child with the parents present, ideally, and teaching the parents how to parent the child well. And I think this is a practice that's come in based on tradition, but adapting to the situations that we're all living in right now. And so I have a friend who knew his parents until he knew who his mom and dad were until he was 5 or 6, and then he was taken to residential school. And his biological parents had to be the ones taking him to residential school and checking him in. And they weren't the same people he knew as his parents. He had been raised by an aunt and uncle, and they were just called mom and dad. And he didn't know they were not his parents until he went to residential school, which turned out to be a double trauma for him. But I find that that's pretty common in many ways now, that the parents or the aunties and uncles are stepping in to co-parent and make sure that parenting is as healthy as possible, that the attachment is not disrupted, and that it's a way to slow down and, if possible, come to a stop with all the reactive attachment that's been going on in our families. So any questions or comments so far?
This is not really a question, but I'd like your response. You know, when you talk about the bonding with the cradling of the child on the back,
Yeah.
and I'm just aware of the difference between the more Western view of attachment, where it's so important to look the infant in the face, you know, and how children take their cues from our face when they're sad and we're sad, and when they're happy, we're happy, that's how bonding also takes place. So this is really important to be taking in this bodily connection that's not about eye contact.
Right. That's so true, Lori. And also, often the cradles were worn so that the baby faced backwards, so they would be knowing who was around them as well. So I think it was used both ways, depending on the situation and depending on the culture. Yeah. Yeah, feeling that sense of your mother's body. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the cradles are typically made out of birch bark, or yeah, a natural substance, not the metal that we have in a lot of ours right now. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think there was a question from Viola about what the ceremony was called that you were just referencing.
Oh, okay.
With the lap, I guess. If
Oh,
that has a name.
No. Well, maybe it does in the language, but it wasn't given to me. It was taught to me by a Sintian teacher who came into my life, and so she's from northern coastal BC, and so I don't even know that language well enough to try and hunch on a name, but it basically is the soothing reattachment of child and mother. Yeah. And so notice that I've been talking a lot about the women, and because that's the one I know the best. And so many of our teachings for the men have not emerged quite yet, or that I'm not privy to them as a mother or an elder, because our men have been so harmed, I think, far more than the women. I find that a large statement to make, and it's definitely not a black and white statement, but that's what I find, is that our men were the most harmed in the residential school, and lost their role, and lost their, many of them, I think, would say they lost their manhood, because the intensity of the abuse physically and sexually was really so much on the boys. And so the men's teachings are just emerging, and I'm not privy to all of them. And in fact, I think respectfully, it would be the man that would teach them. I do know that men took a major part in parenting and caring and loving. I have never seen such loving boys as I have the boys in the cultures here. And when I hear my sons talk about, I could just take that baby and smooch them and cuddle them all day, I'm thinking, I didn't know any men like that when I was growing up. But the love and care the men give to the babies is quite amazing when it's happening. So I'm not able to share any teachings as it comes to the male, other than that the men were expected to support the women and protect the women. That was the expectation, as well as take part in the parenting. So I don't think they were in the birthing room. Again, I'm not certain about those details when it comes to the male-female roles, or the gender fluidity roles too. Okay, so no questions or comments at this moment. Okay. So once the child is on its way into adulthood, there would be multiple people in their lives, again, emphasizing the attachment to the family, attachment to the community now, and that there would be teaching relationships for the child or the youth. There would be training relationships for the child or youth. And then always the care of that family is the foundation. So it all didn't fall on the parents, it fell on the community. And so with each of the form of the relationship, you again have the resolve for attachment. And I know, for example, when youth would be acting out, or youth would have lost their way for some reason, we call it building the canoe. They would be asked to go with a canoe maker, and this would be on the West Coast, but here in the interior would be for some other function. But it would be a function that serves the community. And so when it comes to the one I'm most familiar with, is building a canoe, they would then be sent to the canoe maker to work with the canoe maker to build a canoe. And the whole time they're building a canoe, they're being taught. And they are learning self-discipline at an active level in order to build a canoe. And they're doing it to serve the community. So when they're finished, this community will have a new canoe, a new way of travel. And they're also around every minute of the time they're building. They're around an elder who probably doesn't say too much, but is just present in the way that elders can be from that spiritual base. And so they have the opportunity to learn from someone other than their immediate family. And the focus is not on the teaching, the focus is on the canoe. So if you've ever done art therapy or expressive arts therapy, you know how that works. So it's a productive relationship in so many multiple ways, a soothing way. We also, again, emphasizing attachment and relationship, we also generally refer to each other by the relationship we have. So I'm called grandmother. I'm also called other things, but along with grandmother sometimes, but it's, I'm called grandmother, and mother is called mother. And we adopt people into our families too, but we give them a name, we give them a relationship. So many times, right now, for example, we have people who are standing up and healing because of the 215 and all of the depth of the hurt that we are re-experiencing at this point. We have aunties, people who are aunties who come in and they're there with us to soothe and nurture us. And so they may not be aunties by physical relationship, but they're in the role of aunties or uncles. And so if you're not familiar with the relationship and you hear people saying uncle or aunt or grandmother or old one, you can assume a physical relationship, but it's not always true. And if you work in our communities, it can become quite confusing because you think you know who's related, but you maybe don't. So I'm grandmother to about 9 children, some of whom are, or grandchildren, some of whom are biologically mine and some of whom are not. I am mother or godmother to about 5 adults, and that's how they refer to me as well. So we are called by the relationship. And then I have a renegade grandson, and he was just with me last weekend, and he kept referring to his dad by his dad's name. He kept saying Gord, and I was like, who's Gord? And rather than saying father or dad, I don't know, he's just decided maybe it's a thing he's going through his I'm growing up beyond my dad thing. I'm not sure. But to hear him call his dad by his given English name was jarring because I'm so used to having the person named by the relationship. So that's a way we emphasize the attachment. We emphasize the relationship is we name the relationship. And I'm just checking my notes to see if I've covered most things. Some emphasis around the spiritual connection again. Okay, I don't think that was for me, was it? No. Okay. That when a child is transitioning from being in spirit world and coming here to the earth, that for the first few years of being on earth, they still can go back and forth between spirit world and the earth world. And so you may have knowledge of children who will say things like, well, my other time I was here, my other mom looked like this, or that happened when I was here before. And that's understood in Indigenous cultures. That means the child is still adjusting to being in this lifetime here, and that they carry memory of another lifetime here. So that's often why, again, the naming isn't given until they're a bit older. They're, again, waiting for an adjustment. And with that, too, there's a saying that to hit the child, a young child, is to hit the creator, because they're still very, very connected to the spiritual world until they're about 4 or 5. And you do not hit the child with words, with emotion, with a hand. To do so is you're hitting the creator, and that will come back on you as an adult, and you don't want to do that. We also, if as parents we're having challenges with the child, because we are so emotionally and spiritually connected to that child and made the commitments we made on behalf of the child, that we will go to other adults in the family or community to discipline the child if necessary. It's too close for a parent to do it. And some cultures actually say it's too close for the mother to do it, that there should be someone, other relative, because the mother is so bonded with the child. So learning to be self-disciplined, you have an adult who can teach that. And if the emotional bond is so strong, then maybe that's not for the parents to do it, if depending on the situation. But that's a common way of making certain the child learns self-awareness and self-discipline. And then around the child, all the adults and the community members who are there, all are respectful in their own way, that the child is a spirit first, and that are treated with respect, and that what the child needs and says is respected and acted on. It's not that the person is little and can't understand. It's that this is a child, this is a spirit, and all parts of that child need to be respected. So you'll hear elders talk very respectfully to children, as though sometimes as though they're adults. So again, the understanding overall is that the child, the spirit, needs to be firmly attached here on earth in order to have a productive life and to go through life in a strong way on behalf of the family, on behalf of the community. And that attachment is key in our cultures. It's absolutely key. And it has a spiritual center to it. It's all an understanding of the spiritual as well as the emotional. And then putting that into action as best we can in the physical realm and the mental realm. So it lasts until we pass over. Yeah. So that's basically what I have to share. Oh, and it's 11. Oh my gosh.
May I ask you a quick question, Jan?
Yeah.
It's so, you know how you said that a child, when a child is transitioning, it can go back and forth between the spiritual and the earthly worlds. So I wonder if, may that apply to people on the autistic spectrum, or, you know, they're like not people that are nonverbal, or even people who are verbal. But I just feel, I mean, this comes very close to my own personal experience, but you know, it feels like there is that way that neuroatypical have a touch to the spirit world that maybe we lose.
Yeah, I think so, Lori. I think there's a lot of things we don't quite understand in the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
And we label them as, well, we label them.
Judge them.
Yeah. And And it doesn't take long to scratch the Indigenous teachings to find that there seems to be a way of understanding there too. And it's in much more fluid, flowery, emotional, loving way. Yeah. So we need to wrap it. Looks like you have to discover how much money you have and other sort of things. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to share this and dig around in my brain and come up with lots of examples. And I wish you the very, very best as an association. I think it's so important to look at attachment in its multiple forms. So all the best. And thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Jen.